Rocco the Wraith Santoro sat enthroned in the velvet shadows of his private club. A kingdom built on fear and whispers. The air, thick with the scent of expensive whiskey and cigar smoke, was his native element. Men with secrets in their eyes and loyalty tattooed on their souls moved around him, their deference a silent testament to the river of blood that flowed from his throne. He was a king in a pinstripe suit, his heart a locked vault, the key long lost to a tragedy he never spoke of. Tonight, a deal was being brokered. A transfer of power that would paint another corner of the city in his colors. His gaze, cold as polished steel, was fixed on the nervous rival across the table when a flicker of movement by the door broke his concentration. A ripple of disturbance. His men, mountains of muscle and menace, were parting like the Red Sea. Through the gap came not a threat, not a rival assassin, but a child. A little girl, no older than 5, with wide dark eyes that held the terrified gravity of the world. Her dress was frayed, her face smudged with dirt and tears, a fragile wildflower that had somehow sprouted through the cracked concrete of his brutal domain. She clutched a worn, one-eyed teddy bear, her tiny knuckles white. She walked right up to his table, oblivious to the halted breath of killers and thieves. She looked straight at him, at the monster they called the Wraith, and her voice, a tiny trembling bell in the sudden silence, uttered the words that shattered his composure. "Mommy won't open her eyes." The whiskey glass in Rocco's hand did not shake. His face did not move. But inside, a fault line cracked open, releasing a ghost he had buried for a decade. The image of another small face, another silent room, another woman who would not wake up. The world tilted, the cigar smoke swirling into a phantom shroud. The rival's sweating face blurred into insignificance. The empire he commanded faded to a distant hum. There was only the child, her bottom lip quivering, her eyes pleading. He froze for a single eternal second, a statue of regret and raw, unbidden pain. Then the ice in his veins melted into a torrent of purpose. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping across the floor like a death sentence. His voice, when it came, was not the quiet growl of a mob boss, but a raw, urgent command that brooked no argument. He pointed a finger at his most trusted soldier. "Take me there." Now the sleek black car, a panther of steel and chrome, tore through the city's glittering veins, leaving the opulent district behind for the crumbling, forgotten arteries of the working class. Rocco sat in the back, the little girl Luna, nestled beside him, her small frame radiating a fearful warmth. He had wrapped her in his cashmere coat, a ludicrously expensive shield against a world that had already been too cruel. His men were silent, a rare occurrence. They knew the story of Rocco's younger sister, found lifeless in her apartment from an illness that struck too fast, a tragedy that had forged the final layer of ice around his heart. They did not need to ask why this child had pierced his armor. He was not the Don of the Santoro family right now. He was a man chasing a ghost, desperate to rewrite an ending he was powerless to change. They arrived at a tenement building that sagged with the weight of 1,000 broken dreams. The air smelled of damp and despair. Rocco took the stairs 2 at a time, Luna's small hand gripped tightly in his. She led him to a door at the end of a dim hallway, the paint peeling like sunburnt skin. It was unlocked. He pushed it open and stepped into a life so different from his own it felt like another planet. The small apartment was neat but threadbare, a testament to a quiet struggle. And there, on a thin mattress on the floor, was the girl's mother, Chiara. Her face was pale, her dark hair fanned out like a raven's wing against the pillow. A book had fallen from her limp hand. Rocco's breath caught. He knew her distantly. She worked at a small bakery in a neighborhood his family controlled, a place he'd passed 100 times. He'd noticed her before, a fleeting impression of quiet grace and a resilience in her eyes that seemed out of place amidst the flour dust and sweet breads. Now that resilience was gone, replaced by a terrifying stillness. He knelt, his expensive suit creasing in the dust. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, his touch surprisingly gentle. A pulse, faint, thready, but there. Relief, fierce and possessive, flooded him. He turned to his men. "Call my personal doctor. Tell him to meet us at the villa." Now he didn't wait for a response. He slid one arm under her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breath a ghost against his skin. He strode out of the apartment, carrying the unconscious woman, with the little girl trailing in his wake, a bizarre dark fairy tale procession. He was Rocco the Wraith, a man who took whatever he wanted. And in that moment he wanted to save her. It was a claim, a pronouncement made not with words but with action. From this moment on, Chiara and her daughter belonged to him. They were his to protect, his to possess, his to save from the world and perhaps from himself. The world returned to Chiara not in a rush, but as a slow, hazy dawn. The first thing she registered was the scent. A clean, crisp fragrance of lavender and something expensive she couldn't name. The second was the feel of sheets so soft they felt like liquid silk against her skin. This was not her bed. This was not her life. Her eyes fluttered open, blinking against the soft light filtering through towering windows. She was in a vast, opulent bedroom, decorated in shades of cream and gold. A masterpiece of a painting hung on one wall, and a crystal chandelier glittered above her like a captive star. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She sat up too fast, a wave of dizziness and a sharp pain in her side making her gasp. "Luna," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Where was her daughter? A shadow detached itself from a chair in the corner of the room. A man. He was tall, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit, his presence filling the enormous room with a palpable aura of power and danger. Rocco Santoro. She knew him by sight, by reputation. He was the Shadow King of this city, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. His face was a study in harsh, beautiful lines, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Your daughter is safe," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "She's with my housekeeper." Eating ice cream for breakfast, Chiara clutched the silk sheets, her knuckles white. Her fear was a living thing, but defiance was her oldest friend. "What is this? Where am I? Why did you take us?" Rocco moved closer, his steps silent and predatory. He stopped at the foot of the bed, his gaze sweeping over her, an assessment that made her feel both fragile and intensely seen. "You were dying," he stated, his tone flat, devoid of sympathy but heavy with fact. "Your appendix ruptured. My doctor operated a few hours ago. In this house," he gestured around the room. "You are in my home. My protection." The word sounded like a cage. She remembered the crushing weight of her late husband's gambling debts. Debts owed to men like him. "I don't need your protection," she shot back, her voice stronger now, fueled by a mother's righteous fury. "I can't afford it." A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed his features. "You mistake this for a negotiation, piccola colomba. Little dove. Your husband's debt to my family is settled. The cost of your life, your care, your daughter's future. It is all paid. You belong to me now." The words hung in the air, brutal and possessive. He had bought her. He had saved her life only to claim it as his own. Tears of rage and helplessness pricked her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not show this man her weakness. She met his gaze, her chin lifted. "I am not a possession." Rocco's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only a chilling certainty. "In my world," he murmured, his voice dropping to a seductive, dangerous whisper, "everything and everyone has a price. And I always collect what is mine." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the gilded cage, the scent of lavender mingling with the stench of fear. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine of captivity and care. Chiara recovered under the watchful eye of Rocco's private medical staff, her body healing while her spirit chafed against the invisible bars of her new life. The villa was a palace, a sprawling estate of marble floors, manicured gardens and breathtaking art. It was also a fortress, patrolled by silent men with guns holstered beneath their jackets. Luna, however, was thriving. She had a room filled with toys, a kind-faced housekeeper who doted on her, and most surprisingly, the rapt attention of the Wraith himself. Chiara would watch from a distance as Rocco, the city's most feared man, would sit on the floor with her daughter, patiently listening to a story about a one-eyed bear or helping her build a wobbly tower of blocks. In those moments the monster receded, and a man lonely and haunted emerged. It was a crack in his armor, a glimpse of the heart he kept so heavily guarded, and it confused her more than his threats. Their own interactions were a battle of wills. He would find her in the library, a vast two-story room filled with the scent of old paper and leather. "You should rest," he'd command. I'm reading, she'd retort, not looking up from her book. He brought her gifts. A delicate silk robe, a first edition copy of her favorite novel, a simple gold chain for her neck. Each one felt like another link in the chain of her possession. I don't want your things, she told him, her voice tight. They are not gifts, he replied, his gaze intense. They are adornments. For what is mine yet, the tension between them was not just anger. It was a taut wire of awareness, humming with an energy that stole her breath. When he stood too close, she could feel the heat radiating from him. Smell the masculine scent of his cologne mixed with something that was uniquely him. Power and steel and a hint of something wild. His consigliere, a sharp-eyed older man named Fabio, watched their dynamic with growing concern. One evening he found Rocco staring out at the garden where Chiara was pushing Luna on a swing, her laughter a bright, foreign sound in the somber estate. She is a complication, Rocco, Fabio said quietly, his voice raspy from a lifetime of cigars. The other families, your cousin Valerio, they see a woman, they see a weakness. Rocco didn't turn. I see a reason, Fabio sighed, a weary, knowing sound. Love is worse than a hit, capo. A bullet you can see coming. This will find you in the dark. The warning hung in the air, but Rocco ignored it. He was addicted to the fire in Chiara's eyes, to the way she challenged him, to the sliver of light she and her daughter had brought into his suffocating darkness. He was the wraith, a king of shadows, and for the first time in his life, he was beginning to crave the sun. Valerio Santoro watched his cousin with the patient hunger of a vulture. He saw the change in Rocco, the subtle softening around the edges, the distraction that had a name. Chiara. From his position as underboss, Valerio had always coveted the throne. His ambition a venomous serpent coiling in his gut. He saw Rocco's obsession not as love, but as a fatal flaw, a crack in the fortress he could exploit. He began his campaign with whispers, planting seeds of doubt among the capos of the other families. The wraith has lost his edge, he'd murmur over glasses of grappa in smoky back rooms. He's distracted by a penniless widow. He's gone soft to test the waters, he staged a provocation. He knew Chiara often walked with Luna in the rose garden, a place that had become her sanctuary. One afternoon he sent one of his more thuggish soldiers, a brute named Enzo, to patrol the area. Enzo cornered Chiara near a fountain, his presence alone a violation. He didn't touch her, but his leering gaze and crude compliment were a clear message. The boss has fine taste, Enzo smirked, his eyes lingering on her. Chiara froze, pulling Luna behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. Before she could even scream, a blur of motion exploded from the direction of the house. Rocco, who had been watching from his study window, moved with a speed that was terrifying. He descended on Enzo like a storm, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply grabbed Enzo by the throat, lifting the much larger man off the ground with one hand, his knuckles white. The brute's face turned purple, his feet kicking uselessly in the air. You will never, Rocco snarled, his voice a low lethal hiss. Look at her again. You will never breathe the same air as her again. Do you understand? He dropped Enzo, who collapsed in a wheezing, choking heap. Get him off my property, Rocco commanded his guards, not even glancing at the terrified man. He then turned to Chiara, his chest still heaving, the violence clinging to him like a shroud. He saw the fear in her eyes, not just of Enzo but of him. The monster she saw. The sight of it was like a physical blow. He reached out as if to touch her, then let his hand fall. The chasm between their worlds had never felt wider or more profound. That night, the villa was suffocatingly silent. Chiara put a sleeping Luna to bed, her own mind a whirlwind of terror and a strange, unwelcome flicker of something else, a primal thrill at seeing him defend her so ferociously. She found him in the library, a glass of amber liquid in his hand, staring into the unlit fireplace. The air was thick with unspoken words. She stood in the doorway, ready to retreat, but he spoke without turning. He won't bother you again. You almost killed him, she whispered. I showed restraint, he countered, his voice flat. He finally turned to face her, his eyes dark with a pain she was just beginning to understand. In my world there is no room for weakness. To protect what is mine, I must be ruthless. He took a step closer, closing the space between them until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. When Luna came to me, he began, his voice rough with emotion, she looked just like my sister's daughter. The day I found them. My sister, dead from a fever that came on too fast. Her little girl trying to wake her up. The confession hung between them, a raw bleeding wound. This was the ghost. This was the source of his pain, the reason he had frozen, the reason he had claimed her. He saw a chance to rewrite his greatest failure. Her anger warred with a wave of unexpected empathy. She saw past the dawn, past the killer, and saw the broken man underneath. Rocco, she breathed, her hand lifting instinctively to his cheek. His skin was warm, his stubble rough beneath her palm. He leaned into her touch, his eyes closing for a fraction of a second, a moment of pure, unguarded vulnerability. He captured her hand, his thumb stroking her wrist. Say mia, anima mia, he murmured, the Italian words a silken caress. You are mine, my soul. He lowered his head, his lips hovering inches from hers, the promise of a kiss, a spark in the darkness. The library, the world, everything fell away until there was only the charged space between them, a place where a monster and a captive could almost be just a man and a woman. The moment was shattered by the sharp ring of his phone. He pulled back, the mask of the dawn snapping back into place. But as he answered, Chiara knew something had irrevocably shifted. He had given her a piece of his shattered heart, and she wasn't sure she ever wanted to give it back. Valerio's scheme grew bolder, fed by Rocco's deepening attachment to Chiara. The near kiss in the library, spied by one of Valerio's informants among the household staff, was the final confirmation he needed. Rocco was compromised. It was time to make his move. He began by sabotaging a major arms shipment, making it look like a rival family, the Falcones, had intercepted it. He used Rocco's own protocols against him, leaking just enough information to make the Falcones seem responsible, while ensuring the blame would ultimately fall on Rocco's perceived negligence. The move ignited a tinderbox of old rivalries. Skirmishes broke out on the streets, the city's fragile peace threatening to shatter. Rocco was forced to spend his days and nights in meetings, quelling rebellions and shoring up alliances, his time with Chiara and Luna curtailed. This was Valerio's design: to pull Rocco back into the bloody mire of their business, to remind the Santoro organization of the cold, ruthless leader he used to be, and to highlight how the woman had distracted him from his duties. Valerio presented himself as the voice of reason, the loyal underboss trying to hold the family together, while their king was lost in a fairy tale. He's not focused, Valerio told Fabio over a game of chess, his words chosen as carefully as his moves. He's thinking of her when he should be thinking of our enemies. This Falcone business, it would not have happened a year ago. Fabio, ever watchful, merely moved his knight. The king is still the king, Valerio. Do not mistake a moment's quiet for a lifetime of sleep. But Valerio was already planning the checkmate. He would orchestrate a full-scale assault on the villa itself, disguised as a revenge strike from the Falcones. In the ensuing chaos, a stray bullet would find Rocco. Valerio would then emerge as the hero, the one who repelled the attackers and avenged his fallen cousin. He would take the throne, and the woman who had caused it all would be a loose end he could easily tie up. He gathered a crew of disloyal soldiers, men whose greed outweighed their honor, and armed them with weapons from the stolen shipment, the perfect false flag. His plan was meticulous. The attack would come during the annual Saints' Day festival, when the city's attention was diverted by fireworks and parades. The villa's security would be strong, but they would be expecting an attack from the front gates from the Falcones. Valerio's men would come from the rear, through the woods bordering the estate, a route known only to a few high-ranking family members. He would personally lead the charge, ready to deliver the final treacherous blow to his cousin. As he briefed his men in a damp, abandoned warehouse, he held up a photo of Chiara. "This is the cause of our weakness," he spat. "When the fighting starts, Rocco's instinct will be to protect her. That is when we strike. Use her. Use the child. Draw him out. His heart is his greatest liability, and tonight we will cut it out." The night of the festival arrived, the distant pop of fireworks a mocking counterpoint to the impending violence. The villa was bathed in soft light, an island of tranquility in a sea of sharks. Inside, unaware of the serpent at their gates, Rocco allowed himself a moment of peace. He was teaching Luna a simple waltz in the grand ballroom, her tiny feet on his expensive shoes, her giggles echoing off the marble. Chiara watched from the doorway, a soft smile on her face. For a fleeting moment they looked like a real family. The illusion was shattered by the sudden, unmistakable sound of automatic gunfire erupting from the back of the estate. The music died. Luna cried out. Rocco's transformation was instantaneous. The gentle father figure vanished, replaced by the hardened warrior. He swept Luna into his arms, passing her to Chiara. "Get to the panic room," he commanded, his voice cold steel. "Now. Do not open it for anyone but me or Fabio." He was already moving, pulling a handgun from a concealed panel in the wall, his men swarming around him, their own weapons drawn. Chaos erupted. Alarms blared. Gunfire tore through the manicured gardens, shattering windows and chipping away at the marble facade. It was a war zone. Chiara, her heart pounding, ran with Luna towards the hidden safe room in the library, but as she reached the door, she saw him. Valerio. He wasn't fighting the invaders. He was directing them, pointing towards the wing where Rocco's office, and now Rocco himself, was located. The betrayal was so stark, so absolute it stole her breath. At that moment, a young guard, barely a man, stumbled back into the library, clutching a bloody wound in his side. He looked at Chiara with wide, terrified eyes. "They came from the woods, they knew the path," he gasped. Chiara's mind raced. Rocco had told her about the old tunnels beneath the villa, a relic from another era. He thought they were all sealed. But he had shown her a map once, tracing a forgotten exit that led from the wine cellar out into those same woods. It was a desperate, insane idea. She looked at the terrified guard, at her crying daughter. She could hide and pray Rocco survived, or she could use the one thing she had, the knowledge he had shared with her in a moment of trust. She made her choice. She handed Luna to the wounded guard. "Barricade this door. Protect her with your life," she ordered, her voice imbued with a command she didn't know she possessed. Then, turning her back on safety, she ran towards the cellar, towards the heart of the storm, armed with nothing but a secret and a desperate need to save the man she was realizing she could not live without. Rocco fought with the brutal efficiency of a cornered wolf. He moved through the gilded hallways of his home, now a battlefield of smoke and shattered glass, dispensing death with cold precision. He was back in his element, the wraith reaping a bloody harvest. But his mind was fractured. One half was focused on the fight, on identifying the enemy and neutralizing the threat. The other half was a constant screaming prayer for Chiara and Luna's safety. He saw the attackers were not Falcone men. Their tactics were sloppy, their gear mismatched. This was an inside job. The realization solidified into a cold, hard certainty when he saw Valerio across the foyer, supposedly fighting alongside him, but his aim was off, his movements theatrical. He was hurting Rocco, positioning him. The final pieces clicked into place when Fabio, his face grim, shoved a tablet into Rocco's hands mid-firefight. It showed security footage from the warehouse, Valerio's face clear as he briefed the assassins. The serpent had finally struck. Rage, pure and volcanic, erupted in Rocco's chest. He roared Valerio's name, a sound of pure betrayal and fury. He charged across the marble floor, his gun raised, ready to execute his treacherous cousin. But Valerio was prepared. He had anticipated this, using Rocco's rage as the final piece of his trap. Two of his heaviest hitters emerged from the shadows, flanking Rocco, their guns trained on him. It was over. "It's a shame, cousin," Valerio sneered, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. "All of this for a baker's widow. She made you weak." He raised his own pistol, aiming it directly at Rocco's heart. Suddenly, a piercing scream echoed from the direction of the wine cellar. "Rocco!" It was Chiara's voice. Every head turned. In that split second of distraction, everything changed. It wasn't a scream of terror but a war cry. The heavy oak door to the cellar burst open, and a flood of dark, viscous liquid, thousands of gallons of priceless red wine from shattered barrels, gushed out, creating a slick, treacherous river on the marble floor. Chiara stood at the top of the cellar stairs, her face streaked with dirt, her dress torn, but her eyes blazing with fierce intelligence. She had used a heavy bar to break the locks on the oldest, largest casks. The assassins, caught off guard, slipped and slid, their footing gone. Rocco didn't hesitate. He used the chaos, dropping to one knee, the wine washing over him as he fired 2 precise shots, taking out the men flanking him. Valerio, his face a mask of disbelief, scrambled for purchase, his triumphant sneer turning to panic. He tried to aim at Chiara, the true source of his ruin, but Rocco was already on him. He tackled his cousin, sending them both sliding across the wine-soaked floor. The fight was no longer about guns. It was primal, brutal. Fists met flesh. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the ruined hall. A battle for the soul of the Santoro family. Rocco, fueled by a love he'd only just admitted to himself, fought not just for his life, but for the future Chiara had shown him was possible. He slammed Valerio's head against the hard marble, the crack sickeningly final. The fighting died down as Rocco's loyal men, galvanized by their leader's survival and the clear evidence of betrayal, swiftly subdued the remaining attackers. Rocco rose slowly, his suit ruined, his knuckles bleeding, his body aching. Wine and blood dripped from his hands. He stood over Valerio's unconscious, but living form. Justice would be served, but it would be the cold, calculated justice of the family, not the hot-blooded murder of a spurned king. He looked up, his gaze finding Chiara. She was still standing at the top of the stairs, trembling now that the adrenaline had faded. She had seen him at his most monstrous, a killer drenched in the evidence of his sins. He was the wraith, and the entire world had just seen his wrath. He took a step towards her, then another, leaving bloody footprints on the floor. He stopped before her, the monster in the fairy tale, stripped of all pretense. He was exposed, his heart in his eyes for her to see, to accept or to shatter completely. "Chiara," he breathed, his voice raw. He was asking a question without words. "Can you still look at me? Can you love the man who is also this beast?" Chiara didn't flinch. She didn't run from the blood or the violence. She walked down the steps, her movements sure and steady, until she was standing directly in front of him. The scent of wine and iron filled the air between them. She looked at his bloodied hands, the hands of a killer. The hands that had also gently held her daughter. The hands that had saved her life. She saw it all, the darkness and the light, the monster and the man, and she chose. She chose him. Reaching out, she took a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and began to gently, methodically, wipe the blood from his knuckles. The act was more intimate than a kiss, a baptism and an absolution all in one. She was not cleansing him of his sins. She was accepting them as part of him, just as he had accepted the broken pieces of her own life. A single hot tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The wraith, the king of a brutal and merciless world, was brought to his knees not by a bullet or a blade, but by a simple act of unconditional love. He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair, his body shaking with the force of his emotion. "You saved me," he whispered, the words a broken prayer. "We saved each other," she corrected, her voice muffled against his chest. In the aftermath, order was restored with a chilling finality. Valerio faced a tribunal of the old guard, his treachery laid bare. He was exiled, stripped of his name and power, a fate worse than death in their world, to be a ghost while still living. Rocco, with Chiara by his side, began to rule differently. The violence was still a necessary language of his kingdom, but it was no longer his native tongue. His reign became one of tempered strength, of ruthless protection for those under his care, guided by the quiet, unwavering moral compass of his queen. She never asked him to change who he was, only to be the best version of that man. She was not a captive in a gilded cage anymore. She was the master of the king's heart, her throne beside his, her power not in force, but in wisdom and love. They stood on the balcony of the villa, now repaired and silent, watching the sun set over the city. Luna slept peacefully inside, her world safe and secure. Rocco wrapped his arms around Chiara from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The diamond necklace he had once given her as a mark of ownership now felt like a simple token of affection against her skin. Can a monster truly be saved by love? Can the blood-soaked hands of a king learn to hold a heart without crushing it? Some say it's a fairy tale written in gunpowder and roses, a story too beautiful to be true in a world so ugly. But as Rocco held Chiara, the lines between the myth and the man blurred, and all that remained was the undeniable truth of their shared soul. "You tell us,"